Because one thing that scares me just a little is the AI and the marketing messaging that's sent out automatically. I can't tell you how many times I've gotten a message on LinkedIn that was just dead wrong. Like I got one the other day and it says, "Oh, I see you're a parts manufacturer's rep." I have no idea where that comes from. And before I built my website, I probably got 4 or 5 DMs that said, "Hey, I looked at your website and I really liked it." I didn't have one when you wrote the note. Okay. So I think an already questionable medium of communication, which is sales, is getting a further bad rap by people trying to automate it and continue to play this numbers game of for every 1,000 people I reach out to, I get 1 response.
Yeah. Let me invite you to sit back, drop your jaw, tongue, and shoulders, take a deep breath, and if you wish, close your eyes for a moment. In a few seconds, you just jumped from head to heart, opening up to receive even more value and fulfillment out of your business and life. And today's episode. I'm your host, Nico van der Venne, confidant to successful CEOs, founders, entrepreneurs, striving to achieve everlasting fulfillment. Welcome to the Everlasting Podcast. With our next guest, Jake, welcome. Tell us who you are and what you do.
Good morning, Nico. I do 2 things. The first is I act as a fractional chief learning officer, which is a fancy term for I go into companies and I act as the head of training and development. So I help them onboard new sales reps, get those sales reps up and profitable in a short period of time. And then I take the next step and I train the sales reps on how to be effective on the phone. I have a degree in psychology with several certifications in neurolinguistic programming, which means that I help representatives get into the minds of the customer, understand their decision-making process, and help them build a solid relationship all within the first couple of minutes.
Okay, nice. Well, getting into somebody's mind sometimes might get a little bit creepy there.
Depends on whose mind you're getting into.
That's true. Don't enter mine. That's amazing. So you're actually doubling the role of starting with the L&D story and then jumping into the actual training of the people. So you have a relationship with both sides of the story, because I know how it feels to be head of L&D. I'm also that for a nuclear power plant, but in a role as more admin directed, all the rules and regulations, all those things that we need to adhere to. But I don't train people. I used to train people. I stopped doing that when I took up this role. And I can imagine it can be challenging to, look at both sides of the coins. How does that feel?
It is challenging. I find when I can do the whole process, when I can do their onboarding and then train them straight through, it makes it easier. Because when you come in and if you have an onboarding program that hasn't fully prepared them for their role, you find that you're going back and redoing your onboarding anyway. So when I can go into the role, take them from onboarding straight through sales training, I find it to be more effective.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Yeah, I can imagine. Yeah, if you can walk the walk with them, it'll probably enter a lot easier than. How's the history? How did you end up in this story? Because there's probably some history right there.
Yeah, I've been in training and development for 30 years. I was a sales rep for 4 different companies. I was number 1 rep in 3 of those 4 companies, and I'm still upset about the 4th one. But at one point, yeah, right. Yeah, there's PTSD for not being the top sales rep. So what wound up happening was one of those employers said, "Why don't you train other people? Would you like to be a field trainer?" I said, "Yeah, that sounds like an okay job," but I had never done it before. And once I did it, I got kind of a passion for it. I've always been fascinated by the terminology people use and the keywords people use and what makes one charismatic rep better than another. I always found it fascinating that 2 people could be very charismatic and likable, And yet one could be a great rep and another couldn't. So I made it my mission over the past 30 years to try and dissect what makes one representative better than another.
Uh-huh.
And contrary to all the sales books that I read, I don't think it's a methodology. I think it's a mindset. And I think it's understanding conversational dynamics that really makes you who you are. Okay. And it's not about all sales calls being the same. It's about all sales calls having the variations that are required to make it successful. And that's kind of how I developed my adaptive conversational blueprint.
Okay.
Yeah,
that's very interesting. So it's really about the adaptation, like you actually name it that way, of who's in front of you. That's how I understand what you're saying right now, is that you adapt to the person that's in front of you or on the other side of the line. And then that's where the story begins. That's what I've always learned as well from, I also used to be in sales. Some people ask me, what haven't you done? But sales was one of the periods where I was, I had a big advantage, actually. I wasn't the sales rep. I was the solution bringer. I was a solution architect. So this is in the IT context where you have an architect and a sales rep who, makes the contacts with the customers, blah, blah, blah. And then I walk in and I make the miracles happen of creating actual solutions for those customers. And I've always found it funny how different the sales reps were, because I had one lady who was, I would say, very, very pragmatic, very direct, very open towards a customer. I think she even mentioned how much we made on each product and stuff like that. So she was really open. And some of the customers really liked that, where other customers were really holding back. Like, if you're telling me everything here, what's the secret? And then you had, the other smoother guy who didn't actually explain everything in detail, but just said, oh, this guy's going to help you. I know what you want. Just give me a call when you need him. This guy's going to help you. He was always pointing at me. It's a kind of different dynamic. But in essence, what I found was every time I was sitting in front of a customer, all I did was be quiet and listen. I don't know if that's some of the story that probably might fit in what you're telling.
Yeah, listening is without a doubt one of the biggest components. And the frustrating thing that I've found over the past 30 years, and another reason I built my own sales training gig, is because people will always tell you really need to listen better. You need to just listen. Mm-hmm. But nobody says to you how you do that.
Oh, yeah.
And nobody says how you do it effectively. And, you'll get listening experts, and I've certainly talked to a couple of them, and they're brilliant people, without a doubt. But there's never that easy process on how to get it done. And so part of what I've done as, with my adaptive blueprint is I built in a section that talks about how to listen effectively and how to use empathy and empathetic statements to elicit information from somebody else. And Nico, there's a lot of science behind this. This isn't something where I just drew it up to make money. This is all backed by psychology, social psychology, neurolinguistic programming, and this stuff has been scientifically proven over and over again. Mm-hmm. And part of me is amazed that nobody has brought this into their sales training programs yet.
Okay. So you're pretty unique in touching those points, because I can imagine, I've learned a lot of stuff from spirituality and so on. So where they actually do talk about certain aspects of psychology that now is being proven by modern sciences in another way, and by test subjects and stuff like that, and of course other methods that are not really ethical. But anyway, they do it anyway. Did it anyway at some point. But it's now something that's becoming pretty clear that those basic older knowledge things are very much applicable. Is there anything in there that you actually found out that's been out there for years and years, like you're saying, and nobody put it in there except for, of course, the listening part and the way you act on the listening, of course? Yeah.
Yeah, I think a lot of it, in my opinion, from the research I've done, a lot of opinions get recycled. Uh-huh. So you look at one of the psychologists, his name was B.F. Skinner. He believed that free will is an illusion. Mm-hmm. We're all just one big set of preconditioned responses based on decisions we've made in the past that have worked out well. So an example of that would be somebody calls you on your cell phone and you look at the phone number and you go, oh my God, I just can't deal with that person right now. And you decide not to talk to them. So you're giving a conditioned response to a stimulus, and the response you're giving is something that has worked out well before, which is just not picking up the phone. And for a while, B.F. Skinner kind of fell out of play, and other psychological theories came in. And now, ironically enough, conditioning is coming back into play again. So I think you'll see this constant recycle. But one thing that has never really gone away is people's needs to be heard. And this is documented on cave drawings. People drew on cave walls to be heard and to remember their own stories. And you look through the Renaissance period and people building unique buildings and now social media, the need to be heard has never, ever gone away. And the need to be understood is even greater.
True.
So the part that is difficult to comprehend sometimes is that people will take a ton of time to watch cat videos on YouTube, but nobody ever goes and looks for a video that says, hey, here's how to be more involved in a conversation and to reduce misunderstandings and be a better communicator.
Yeah.
And yet we do it all the time, right? We're with a partner, a friend, a parent, we're at the job. We all need practice.
True. Yeah.
And so that has never changed.
Yeah. That's a nice one. Yeah, I can imagine. I'm just thinking about the cave drawings in France right now. It's like just the image just pops up into my head, and it's such a simple thing that's been out there so long. And I understand what you mean by being listened to. One of the things that I've worked on with what I've got this new service that I'm putting out into the world, and a part of it is getting people out of isolation, and which means that I focus on CEOs and founders, and in that role, which is it's a leadership role, and a lot of them become kind of lonely in that role. They're not lonely as a person per se, but they're lonely in that role, so they get into an isolation. And I've noticed when I go into a conversation, it's not a conversation. It's actually I'm listening and replying, like you said, with the necessary confirmation that I listened to them. Basically, saying things that they said, repeating it. It sounds like a parrot, but no, it's not that. It's not. You emphasize the words and you change it to change maybe some perspective or hand them over something that they didn't think of, but not literally. You're just using their words and changing those into a certain way that they get a different viewpoint of the world. But at least you listened. And I myself, that's the reason why I've started this service, because I myself in the last couple of years, I've been rolling since 2020, right before COVID, my business started. I did not stop. I just continued. I just took on everything I could find clients anywhere. I just did it. And I've seen a lot of people, disappear from the business zone. But what I found in all those years was I was looking for somebody who would listen to my story, not per se to sell it to them, but listen to my story so I could get a different perspective. Because one of my mentors at some point told me, you should actually have 3 categories of people in your network. One is a spiritual person. It could be a pastor, could be whatever, maybe the Pope, for instance. But you need somebody who is extremely, extremely rational. And then he came up with the most extreme expression. He said, either you get a pedophile or a murderer, but you need one of the two in your network. And I'm like, what are you saying? This is just, the extreme is too far. And he said, no, it's the idea that counts. The fact that you listen to these different perspectives gives you a completely different viewpoint from the world. And I found that it's exactly what you're saying. Listen to other perspectives, listen to the people, and then act on those stories. So is that one of the parts that probably gets into your sales training then?
Well, I'm not sure if I go so far as to say the pedophile or murderer part, but I do agree that, You need to have different perspectives. And I think we've all seen those failures of a partnership that goes in where the two people think the same and they can't get out of their own way, or they don't ever think about other perspectives. And frankly, Nico, this is part of neurolinguistic programming too. The programming says that we're all primarily visual, auditory, or kinesthetic. And in order to make good decisions, you need to access all three of those in yourself to make those decisions. So even I think internally, you need to look at the differing views in order to make solid decisions. And frankly, if I think back to some lousy decisions I've made, and I've made plenty in my life,
who hasn't?
yeah, right. You look at it and you think, wow, that one modality, that one component was missing from this decision. And had I factored it in, I may not have made that decision. So, yeah, I agree with what you're saying 100%. And CEOs getting lonely, I can see that. You know, lonely is the head that wears the crown, and you're making all those decisions. And yeah, so I think your service is probably a very valuable one.
Yeah, I hope so. Yeah, it's something that's for me. It's I only started with this like the beginning of the year, but I had so many conversations already with top level people that you notice that they're actually yearning for that listening ear that is not judgmental, that's confidential, and all of that wonderful stuff. And I'm talking about that level right now, but I can see that in all the levels of society, that even trailer park people, for instance, just can go to the other side of the spectrum. What we may well say is they also want somebody to listen to them, because they probably ended up there in through certain steps in life, and maybe not anybody listened to them and helped them in getting to a different perspective so they can change their life, for instance. Maybe they're even happy there. Could happen as well. But I found that so profound, and it actually comes down again to one basic thing. It's communication. If it's one way or two way, it's about communication. And it interests me enormously how much communication is purely the basis of all sales stories. It can be written, can be visual, can be auditive. And like you said, neurolinguistic programming is a very nice basis. I can't remember always the statement, but the world is my map and I am the map. I can't remember that one, so kind of mix those up. But basically, it's perspective. I always get the image of the lady and the young lady, which is I think it's in Stephen Covey's 7 Habits of Highly Effective People, that you can find that, where you look at the picture, and for one person, it's an old lady. And for another person, it's a young lady. Yeah. I love that picture. It's just amazing. I showed it to my partner at some point a couple of years ago, and she was looking at it. She says, I don't see anything. I was like, you don't see it? People tell me they see an old lady or a young lady, and you're saying you don't see anything?
Yeah.
And she's like, no, to me, it's just a drawing. And I'm like, wow, that's a third different kind of perspective. It's just it's so wonderful how the human mind works, isn't it?
It is. And I think we're all based in story, whether we know it or not. I've had some clients that say, you know, I can communicate okay, and I don't always want to be heard. And I always relate them back to the last time you went on vacation. If you don't want to be seen or heard, why take pictures? None of us take pictures with it in mind that I'm going to hoard these, never look at them again, or show them to anybody. You know, we're in the world of a selfie.
Yes.
Let's say you're a golfer and you get a new driver and you drive 10 yards further than any of your friends. No golfer on the planet would not tell their friends that I'm out driving you. Yes. Right? We all do things to have a story to be able to tell. And I think one of the worst things we can do is not listen to that story and acknowledge another person. And this is part of the sales process. Right? It's getting on the phone, it's talking with somebody and understanding what their issue is with the hopes that you can solve it. And I think we kind of lost that a while ago. We got into this whole of, I have to make 100 calls before I can close one person. We don't look at anything else in life like that. I don't think I have to go to 100 stores before I can buy a loaf of bread. I don't think I have to date 600 people before I find a soulmate. We do a lot of things to narrow the odds and make sure our selection is better each time we go to do it.
Mm-hmm.
And yet Fortune 500 companies are talking mathematics when it comes to their sales because they don't know a different way. And I'll tell you, Nico, the companies that I've worked with and I've done this with, we've 3x sales. We've increased customer service ratings by 1.5 stars. It's not a hard process, but get away from the script, get away from all these videos on your LMS, and sit down and actually learn about what other people and how they make their decisions. And your sales are going to go through the roof.
True. So true. Yeah. I can imagine that. Yeah, the conversations that I've had in the past where actually sales came out, final decision of signing a contract was never about a script. On the contrary, it was a personal human-to-human conversation about what the issue was and the possible solution that you could bring. What I've found at this point is there's so much clutter going on, and all these ads and all these videos they're being creating, trying to get the hook and then drag you through the story and then come at the end with a proposition that sounds like it's so easy. And I'm like, no, it's not. Life is not easy. It's hard. But if you realize that and you understand, you accept it, then it makes it easier because you're looking at it completely differently. It's like I just come out of a mastermind call right now. They call it a breakthrough session, which is based on the work. Byron Katie, I think the name is. Can't remember. I always forget the name, but the work in any case. And every time we have a discussion there is about a situation that somebody had in the past, and they got stress out of it. And when we started talking about it and looking at the situation first emotionally, and then you go over to becoming a very rational person and just say statement, I was on the phone with person X. So the first part is I was on the phone with person X and he made me that and that and that, feel that and that and that. And then afterwards, I was on the phone with somebody. I was on the phone with somebody. And that's all this. You change the emotions to a completely different story. And then it comes down to, okay, what am I feeling? What's happening here? And you see a solution at the end, which is basically saying you're a human being. Step back, look at the situation, communicate with yourself internally, and then come out again and start your conversation with that person again on the phone in a completely different way. I forgot where I came from with this. Kind of lost my thread there. But in any case, I find it amazing how we can simply help a lot of people by just listening. Yeah.
Well, and that's another foundation, not to keep going back to neurolinguistic programming, but that's another foundation is, what do you say when you talk to yourself? And how associated or dissociated are you with those feelings? And so what you're saying is just an amazing testament to NLP and how it really intertwines with a lot of different philosophies nowadays.
Absolutely, yeah.
Because I was reading an interesting article the other day. It was somebody who's very well known in the sales space. And he said, by and large, we don't think about what we say. We just kind of say it, and then we deal with the ramifications of what's been said. And this person said, think about where we would be if we actually understood our own thought process first and then worked on understanding someone else's, how much communication would explode. But that's not the way it's always been done, right? From the time we're 5, we're just like, hey, that's my mom, which is yours. Hey, I like trucks. What do you like? And we don't give a lot of thought to it. But I truly hope somewhere out there is an emerging science of not just psychology, but understanding each other and where we're coming from, and a sincere effort to get to know ourselves better, to understand why we do what we do. And I realize we're getting very esoteric here and probably way off the range of what we're talking about. But the best salespeople I've ever seen, and I've seen well over 10,000, the best salespeople I've ever seen are ones that truly listen and shift gears on the fly.
Hmm.
And those people are nothing short of amazing.
Yeah, I can imagine a couple of conversations going there. Yeah, that I've even was part of on the other side of the table. Even yeah, I had one conversation with a sales guy who was we're implementing a software. We're thinking of implementing a software, and he was the first one to actually ask us, "Why are you doing this?" Nobody out. They were all talking about the features and beautiful stuff and how cheap they were and
Yeah.
blah blah blah. But nobody asked the question, "Why are you changing out this software?" And the funny thing was, we even well, ourselves didn't even think about it. It was something that was mentioned, like, we need this new software. And like,
Gotta
okay,
have it.
why? Nobody asked that question, but it was amazing. And we ended up, yeah, of course, we ended up buying from this person because he was, insightful, and he knew what he needed to ask us. And he ended up being a kind of a business consultant instead of a salesperson. He walked the walk. He walked with us on everything, and in the end, it was an amazing experience. Um, and I think sometimes that's some of the things that I've noticed in the consultancy world, for instance, where the name itself actually clearly states that you are a consultant, you are an advisor, you're not the decision maker, and I see a lot of consultancy stories where they push stuff and they say you need to do this. They don't advise you anymore. And I think there's a balance between selling something, consulting a customer, and actually telling them what they need to do.
Yeah. Yeah, I agree. I always think back to one particular salesperson that I had probably 12, 13 years ago. He was a guy in a cell phone store, and I was looking for a new cell phone.
Mm-hmm.
And I told him, I'm like, I want the iPhone, I want top of the line, this and that. And he would not sell it to me. He's like, tell me what you want to use it for. How much are you going to be on the web? Are you going to be doing any gaming? Are you going to be doing long distance calls? And he pre-qualified what I was looking for the whole time. And some people may listen to this and go, well, if he was a good salesperson, he would have just sold you what you wanted.
Mm-hmm.
But I look at the flip side of that and I say, a cell phone is a lot of money. And I know we all finance it out from here until our dog dies. But the fact of the matter is, he cared enough to say, you're going to spend a lot of money. Let's make sure that you're spending it on exactly what you need.
Mm-hmm.
And so he appealed to my personality. And I'm sure for another person, he would have said, sure, just here's the phone, we have it in stock. But that flexibility is just crucial. And it's tough to find it in just about anybody. I look at what you're doing as a podcast, and I think you guys are the ultimate communicators because you ask questions, you listen for answers, you ask questions based on that. And the main difference is because I think you're not trying to sell anything. You're just trying to legitimately have a great conversation. But podcasters are excellent examples of conversationalists.
That's a major compliment to a lot of people that we know. I think you also know Ben Albert. So
yeah.
Shout out to
Ben
Ben
and I are
Albert
close.
on that.
Yep.
He's an amazing guy in that sense. Yeah. Well, that's one of the things why I love doing the podcast. The last episode was with Kimberly Spencer. She's called the communication queen, and she actually has a what's it call it again? It's kind of an agency to be a guest on a podcast. And we also had a short conversation on the sense of podcasting, that it's an amazing tool to bring out a lot of value into the world. Of course, people need to take time to listen to it, etc. These days, you can put it on 1.5 speed. I even have a friend who watches movies on 1.5 speed to 2 speed, and I'm like, why do you enjoy the movie anymore? It's like watching Star Wars. The lasers go faster.
Yeah.
No. I go to the movies to enjoy the movie, not to see as many as I can. But it's just, in the podcasting world, it's like kind of different, where you bring out some value, and some of the podcasts are amazing, and people drop out at some points in a podcast when it slows down, and you feel that the questions are kind of rudimentary. how are you, what are you doing, blah blah. But in some of these episodes, I've listened to podcasts that are 2 hours long, and they're extremely long, of course, but some of the gems that are in there are just beautiful. And like you
Yeah.
say, you're not selling anything. You're bringing your knowledge. You're like you're explaining how your sales process works. For instance, what are you training on? You're giving them the details, so people listen back to this episode because there's a lot of stuff in there. But anyway,
Yeah.
but yeah, I understand what you mean, and absolutely, I understand why it's such. There's a lot of hype on podcasting these days, and I look forward to meeting every person that. Thank you again for instance, for all the people that you connected me with as well. And
You're
that's also
welcome.
one of the amazing things. There is a lot of the guests are just so open to connect you with so many people, because you give them the opportunity to talk, and then indeed people listen.
Yeah. Yeah. Without a doubt.
Yeah, yeah, it's amazing. So Jake, this is amazing. I'm just thinking of what you've been saying this whole time on sales, on listening. Um, if I pose you one question on, let's say for instance, there's the last person that listens to this podcast, and it's years in the future. What would you love that person to tell you today? So if it would be time travel and coming back and say, Jake, I listened to your podcast 20 years from now. What would you love to hear from them?
I think it would be nice to hear that they made every attempt to listen to the people in their lives a little bit more.
Mm-hmm.
I work with a lot of people one-on-one. I do a lot of individual coaching as well as corporate coaching. And one of the things I find is that whether it's a partnership that's struggling business-wise, or a partnership between two people at home that is struggling, it's almost always down in some way to either the way they heard something or the way they communicated something.
Yeah.
And I think I'd like to hear from that person who came back that they realized that communication's a two-way street.
Mm-hmm.
So the onus is on both the communicator and the listener to make things happen.
Yeah.
And I've made a ton of mistakes on this over my life. I don't mind telling you, I am divorced and remarried, and I made a lot of mistakes in my first marriage. And one of them was not communicating effectively.
Mm-hmm.
So I guess I just want to know that people are paying more attention to these types of conversations, and people are making more of an effort to get better at communicating. Because one thing that scares me just a little is the AI and the marketing messaging that's sent out automatically. I can't tell you how many times I've gotten a message on LinkedIn that was just dead wrong. Like I got one the other day and it says, "Oh, I see you're a parts manufacturer's rep." I have no idea where that comes from. And before I built my website, I probably got 4 or 5 DMs that said, "Hey, I looked at your website and I really liked it." I didn't have one when you wrote the note. Okay. So I think an already questionable medium of communication, which is sales, is getting a further bad rap by people trying to automate it and continue to play this numbers game of for every 1,000 people I reach out to, I get one response.
Yeah.
What they're not thinking of is the opposite. That maybe the other 999 messages that didn't get a response were turning that customer off to you and your company.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. Yeah, I feel 100% what you're saying, because I've had the same thing. And even in the past, when I was still employed, working for IBM, I think at the time, I was open for a new opportunity, and I started looking for something. And one of these headhunters, I always found that a very, very harsh word to say, headhunters. But in all honesty, it's applicable to some. And they were telling me, I've got an opportunity for you, blah, blah, blah. So they contacted me out of the blue in LinkedIn, and we met up a couple of miles from my place for a coffee. And this was just somebody who was filling the database with names and CVs. And I'm like, I was really angry. I was saying, come on, you're taking like more than an hour of my time to talk to me for nothing. And she said, well, we have our opportunities and blah blah blah. I said, no,
Yeah.
no, you don't. You're just filling your quota of amount of people that you've put into databases. I said, I can find a monkey to do that. Sorry, just to be cruel, but and it's kind of a pity. It's been out there for years, of course. It's not specifically with LinkedIn, but and these days I have fun with these kind of messages. I'm cruel with them. When it's something that's completely off, I just ask, okay, exactly, where did you find that? What did you find interesting? And then they start replying, and then after like a couple of ones back and froze, I'm like, really, did you really believe you would get through to somebody by telling me this? It doesn't even apply to my profile.
Yeah.
I graduated electromechanics, and at some point I still had that diploma on my profile, and they were contacting me for that. And I said, yeah, I'll come do the electricity in your place. Don't worry, it'll work. I haven't done it for 20 years, but don't worry, it'll work.
Yeah.
Not a good idea at that point.
Well, you bring up an interesting point that they're trying to meet their metrics.
Mm-hmm.
And that's another scary part, I think, of the whole sales process is a metric is how many calls and how many sets you get a day. Mm-hmm. And that, although I understand why those metrics are there, I've yet to go to a company where they've had a quality metric, where it's like, we want 15 quality calls in a day. And some people may say, well, how do you judge that? There's a million ways to judge that. And I think it should be factored in. And the companies I've worked with and we factored it in, their number of calls outbound have shrunk, but the number of closes has gone up exponentially.
That's amazing.
So I think somewhere in there, we need to adjust certain KPIs to make it that our success rates have a better chance of increasing.
Yeah, useful KPIs. I got a little book on that somewhere here, and it is absolutely true. So the organization where I'm right now, they have like 4 or 5 very specific KPIs for training. So they're like the legal trainings, etc. So everybody has to get their certification after 5 years and recycle those and stuff like that. And then we have this 2-year screen where they need to be qualified for their job. They have to be they get exams and they go through the whole process. And when they pass the exam, they are allowed to work alone. Basically, that's it. And there's a couple of KPIs there with absences and stuff like that. And last year we were discussing this on, for instance, no-shows, people that do not show up for a training. In the past, they used to really, hit them on the head of why didn't you go, blah, blah, blah. And there was usually some really good reason for it. So we kind of applied a couple of other metrics there, and we ended up becoming completely different in how we looked at the KPI. We looked at how many times in the past has this person canceled that same training, how many times did they not show up, and then ask them the questions of why did you cancel it this many times and why didn't you show up so many times. And you reduce the amount of people you have to talk to, because if nobody cancels it, that just don't show up, usually there's something that happens. Okay, you give them a second chance. And what came out of it is the training was no longer applicable. But in an organization this size, people are just accepting and denying or doing or not doing. They have a lot of work to do. And this is the last thing they were thinking about. So we changed the metric completely to something useful. And it's like you say, the quality is a lot more important there than just fixing the numbers and saying, look at this. We had so many no-shows. We had so many cancellations. No, that doesn't help an organization. That's just saying to a standard somewhere, yes, we are complying with your question. And that's not what we need. The world is a practical place. They need to be practical things. And that's as well something that I've noticed in my own business is I don't have a lot of calls. I have maybe in a month like 10, 20 calls with people, but usually those are very qualitative calls, and we have a nice conversation. And especially when you come into the the high achievement story, people that are in high achievement, when they say half an hour, that it's a half an hour. It's not an hour. They don't stretch the conversation with all sorts of stories. They're very specific. And I've become the same way, where I used to be the guy who spent a long conversation and never selling anything because you're too scared to ask for the sale. It's one of the points that I've learned as well. At some point, we need to ask the question, say, can I help you with something? And if they say yes, that's the point where you tackle into your sales position. I don't know if that's the good way to go from your perspective, but I've noticed that kind of helps for me at this point.
Well, that's all part of being adaptive, right? What's going to work for you and what you found to be effective. I will say that one thing I advocate for is not selling it all for the first 2 to 3 minutes. Like when I do outreaches to people, I don't ever talk about myself or my product for the first 4 or 5 times we talk.
Mm-hmm.
And what you find is that people's need to reciprocate is huge. So after you have 4 or 5 communications back and forth where you ask about them and get into what their needs are, eventually they come back and say, Jake, we've spent a lot of time talking, but it's yet to be about you. What are you bringing to the table? Yeah. And what's cool is that's when they're most receptive to your message.
Mm-hmm.
We tend to think that people are receptive from the time we start talking to them. Yeah. And in some cases, that may certainly be true. But for the most part, when you're reaching out to a client, they want to talk about their favorite topic, which is what? Themselves.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
So if I can get them doing that and do it sincerely, there's nothing malicious about it, but do it sincerely, 90% of the time that person will come back to you and be genuinely interested in you. And I think that's a big piece.
Sorry to interrupt, but is this kind of the story where you say, don't kiss on the first date?
Yeah, I guess you could say that.
Reminds me of a conversation I had really, really short a while back. Yeah. But I can imagine. Mm-hmm.
The human need to reciprocate, and they've been proving this over and over again too, is deeply ingrained in all of us.
Mm-hmm.
And if you watch the cop shows where they bring him into the interrogation room and they say, do you need a cup of coffee? Or the guy says, can I have a cigarette? That's for a reason. They do something for them in the hopes that they will get some reciprocation when they start asking the question. So yeah, reciprocation is just a deep, deep rooted need we all have to want to give back.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah. It kind of brings me back to the start of our conversation where when you were talking about it, I had the thing in mind of legacy. Like when you're saying about people leaving stuff behind and being shown and seeing and creating stuff that leaves caves, cave drawings. I was thinking about, when somebody listens to you, you have the feeling that your personality is given to somebody and they will remember you. I love the quote of people don't remember you for what you did, but people remember you for what you made them feel. And I think that's the same story where you have the conversation, you're listening, and they feel listened to. So it's kind of addictive, I think. That guy listens to me. I'm going to call him again. I'm going to tell him my story again. I would do that. To be honest, I would do that. Somebody would listen to me like, yeah, I'm going to call that guy again. Yeah.
Well, and if you think about that in our everyday life, when you're bumming and you need to talk to somebody, who do you call? Absolutely. You call the person that you know is going to listen to you.
True.
You don't call that person that never lets you get a word in edgewise. And when we call with good news, we don't call the downer in our life. We call the person that really wants to cheer for you. So we do all this unconsciously already. Mm-hmm. And I think if we brought that to our conscious minds a little bit more and say, let me be that person for somebody else. Imagine how that transforms things. You and I met through Ben. Yeah. And Ben, to me, is one of those giver, networker, let me help you personalities. And it's no wonder Ben is so well-liked and well-respected. It's because he thinks nothing of helping you expand your network.
Mm-hmm.
And I just think if we all did that for everybody else, it would be interesting. And listen, I don't want to say I'm capable of this every day. There are some days I'm just in a lousy mood and it's like, today's all about me. So I don't want to pretend that this is an easy task, but if you did it for one person a day, think about how that would come back to you. I just gained a big client a month ago and I said, oh, thank you for calling me. Who referred you to me? And it was a guy I had trained 15 years ago.
Wow. Okay.
So it was certainly a long sell. But, it's just one of those things.
ROI on that.
Yeah. So you just think about that and you think, man, an impact I intentionally made 15 years ago has just kind of borne fruit.
Mm-hmm.
It's just amazing. Giving is by far the easiest way to receive something.
So nice. Yeah, absolutely. So Jake, I am so grateful for your time, and I know we discussed the hard stuff a little later. So I just want to respect your time, like I do with a lot of people. I have one more question that I want to ask you, and that is, how can people, get into your groove? Because I think if people get into your groove, they're going to, sky's the limit. Well, there's no sky, there's no stars, there's just beyond. I think. How can people reach you? How can they step into your story, and how can you help them?
Yeah, so Nico, they can reach me one of two places. I'm not a big social media maven. I enjoy just having one or two focal points. So you can reach me on LinkedIn, and you can reach me at my website, jakestahlconsulting.com. Cool. And if people want to, I will give them a free 1-hour consult just to see if there's any way I can help them. Mm-hmm. And the way I look at it is, I will never sell you while we're on the consult. And if when we're done, you decide you want to continue with me, we'll figure it out. But if not, at least you have one more person in your network that can help you hopefully get your name out and introduce you to other people.
Nice. Thank you very much for that. And I'm sure that you'll probably hear a couple of people contacting you through one of the channels. That's my hope in any case. Thanks for your time, Jake.
My pleasure, Nico. Thanks for having me. It was an honor.
I loved it as well. It was cool. Thank you very much. Thank you very much, listeners, for following our podcast. And we'll hear you next time on the Everlasting Podcast.
Thank you for listening to the Everlasting Podcast. Let me leave you with a few questions to answer in the comments. How do you see the different topics we discussed during this interview? What are your thoughts? What stood out for you? Let us know in the comments or just send us your feedback. We launch new episodes weekly. Don't miss any by ensuring you are subscribed to the show. Click the follow button now. We depend on the organic growth of the podcast to inspire more and more people. So by giving us a 5-star review and sharing this episode with at least one of your friends who might be interested in the subject, you will significantly help more people become inspired. But more than anything, I am grateful to you for taking the time to listen to the show. If you are also a successful CEO, founder, or entrepreneur who has inspiring words to say, feel free to contact us for an interview at contact@nicovandevenne.com. Thank you for listening. We will see you again soon with more inspirational conversations on achieving everlasting fulfillment.